Hi, I'm Beena Patel, a physician associate turned spiritual mentor, quantum healer, women's coach, and speaker. Welcome to The Voice That Sees. This podcast is an intimate dialogue on topics ranging from science and spirituality to alternative forms of healing, vulnerable storytelling, the esoteric ancient wisdom, the power of individual transformation, and how it impacts the collective evolution of humanity. Each episode, you will learn how to evolve by shifting your mindset and ways of being, express your vulnerability to heal and transform, and channel your emotions into self-expression, creating a greater impact in the world. Let's continue your journey together. Welcome back to the first episode of 2026. Today's episode on The Voice That Sees is about a topic that is very much a parallel to much of my life's journey, and I believe that this can be relatable to many other women's journey, particularly women who are powerful, women who are powerful in the sense of being ambitious and driven and really desiring positive change on this planet. Women who have felt this fire inside of them, even from a very young age, knowing that they are here to do bigger things on this planet. This conversation is for you, and I'm really excited to open it up today. So 2025, we're taking a little bit of a step back. This might be somewhat uncomfortable for some people. However, I want to share my experience of what my entrance into 2025 looked like. So I went into 2025 in this spiritual ceremony in New York City. And I didn't really mingle with too many people there because once I got there, I kind of didn't feel as though I really belonged there. And a part of me also invited me to stay there for the duration because I knew I was there for a reason. While I was there at the spiritual ceremony, the facilitator invited the group into writing their obituary. I know this might be heavy for some people. As a clinician who's worked in oncology and also provided palliative care, I've worked closely with palliative and supportive care in some of these big institutions in New York City. And I also learned and was trained in how to provide end-of-life care. And so working with hospice, working with different facilities to provide things such as in-home hospice care. And these conversations often were something that we could learn over time how to have them with confidence. And yet each patient was so different that it would open you up to new dimensions within yourself, whether you were experiencing different emotions or just noticing the different questions people would ask. It really opened my eyes up to some of the deeper inquiries of the heart, especially at such a tender time. Now, at the ceremony, fast forward, having this invitation to write something as intimate as the obituary, I paused and took a step back and asked, do I really want to do this? And then there was another part of me that said, what kind of impact do I want to leave on this planet? So this wasn't a part of me that declared it. It was more so a part of me that asked. And in the asking, a powerful declaration came about. This doesn't mean that you need to write something like this. This is an invitation to ask yourself, what do you truly want out of your life, out of your existence? The meaning that you want to have lived in your human experience. And having this kind of impact and even envisioning it is what allows us to create a life that will one day potentially be unforgettable. Something that became really clear to me was that I didn't necessarily start my brand, the yoga movement, to constantly check numbers and engagement and want to learn all the different ways of algorithms with social media to bump up my content. I didn't come to be a lifestyle or wellness influencer. I came to be a leader and to make positive impact on the planet. And it wasn't something that just came to me in that moment. I've known it for a very long time. And once I put it to paper, things started to move. And a different part of my life was becoming activated and starting to move forward in motion. And I realized it's because for a long time I had been wanting to please people and seeking this external validation, which at times we don't even know how deeply we're seeking that outside of us until we look at certain behaviors and patterns in our lives, such as noticing whether we feel good or we feel torn apart based on other people's reactions or responses to some of the things going on in our lives, whether we're being celebrated or praised or not. Looking at things like the engagement with our Instagram, for instance. I've had such a journey with Instagram, and I'm currently on a social media detox indefinitely until God decides that I can be back on. And I want to share that there's been a burst of energy already within me, even though it's only been a few days. And so it's opening my eyes to understand how much weight we put on these devices and these different forms of media when it doesn't really come from a pure place. It comes from this place of wanting to feel validated outside of us, to feel as though we're creating the right thing based on the numbers instead of feeling into our heart and asking ourselves, was this part of the plan? Was this part of God's plan for what we are here to do? Or are we making that correlation based on the algorithm, based on the level of engagement our content reaches? Having this awareness and taking a step back and also going through a major reconstruction in 2025, the entire year, which I'll go into a little bit today, I realized that if you are on the path of leadership, if you are someone who knows you are here to be influential, that you have these leadership qualities within you, that you know you're here to make impact in some form of way. Maybe it's not traditional leadership. Maybe you're a poet, a writer, a creative, a businesswoman, something different, something that challenges the norm of what society has traditionally accepted. This conversation is an invitation to ask yourself, who are you here to be? Who has God called you to be in this new season, in this new cycle, in this new era? And what does that require of you? History has shown us that often powerful women haven't been typically accepted. They've been known as too much, too outspoken, and easily ridiculed. And where many women see this shift is when they've shifted out of the good girl archetype and into the archetype of a woman who allows herself to take up space unapologetically. Now, I do want to make this distinction because there's that famous quote, something like, well-behaved women rarely make history. And I feel that this is a blurry space because I understand the context of what that quote signifies, that women who live within the confines of the boxes that society has created or what we have felt based on what we have been taught by our own culture, by our families, by the people we love, that we have to stay within the lines of certain boxes. That when a woman dares to step out into the edges of who she could be, who she's destined to be, instead of staying small and confined to everyone else's expectations, that this challenges the status quo. And so when we think of women who weren't typically well-behaved, women like Marilyn Monroe, we often think of figures who might have been a little bit more provocative, women who were daring to be someone different, women who spoke their truth, women like Maya Angelou. And so there's space for all these different women to exist. And I did want to note that there was different history behind what made these women so great. And there were also shadows that these women struggled with. For instance, one of the things that really stands out to me about Marilyn Monroe. She was a huge sex symbol of her time. She knew how to work her sensuality, and she was absolutely stunning. And she carried many different roles. She wasn't just this symbol of beauty. She also acted in certain movies. She was able to sing beautifully, and she became this performer. And so sometimes when we think of powerful women, we think of these women who were able to perform. And something that I want to share today, without any intention of disrespecting these women who came before us, is that we have to ask ourselves if power is coming from a place that's authentic versus if it's performative. And it's something that every woman has to meet within herself. I certainly did. And that was a huge part of my journey in 2025. The reason I share this is because power in and of itself, and I've had several episodes where I've talked about this on The Voice That Sees. There's one that you can listen to. It's all about power and the book Power versus Force, and how true power isn't trying to force anything. It's not trying to force the world to see us as a certain representation. True power speaks in and of itself. Now, the line gets blurry for women, for artists in this area where we're no longer actually being true to who we are. And there is a place for performance. There is a place for performers on stages. When we're on a stage, we sometimes do get into that mode of, okay, I'm here, I'm on stage, and now I'm ready to share whatever wants to be expressed through me on the stage. And there's this element of eyes being on us, people watching us, and we show up in a different way. When we take that persona off stage and that persona is adopted to the point that we identify with it and embody it and emanate it in our every encounter, conversations, our interactions with people, then our relationships become diluted because we aren't showing up as who we are. We're showing up as who we think we need to be. And we see this a lot in social media. I have literally done a review of so much of my content. And I noticed that in the last few years, based on wanting to grow my social media platforms to have this bigger impact, I started to share messages that secretly inside I had hopes that it would bump me up on the algorithm. And often it didn't. And even in the times that it did, it might have happened maybe 4 or 5 times, the feeling of satisfaction was so fleeting. I remember right after one of my posts went viral, at least viral in my context, I remember thinking, oh wow, this got thousands of likes. And I felt fulfilled for maybe a few days before I felt, okay, what's the next thing I have to post? And will it get this much views and this many likes? And again, when we constantly start identifying with that version of us versus the version of us who isn't seeking so much validation outside of us, but instead asking, what is a message that wants to come through from the depths of my soul? What wants to be expressed through me that feels resonant and aligned? What do I need to sit with perhaps a little bit longer because it's still cooking inside of me? That when I do share this, you can feel the deeper messages. You can feel the intention behind what is being spoken rather than what is just being said to say something. And when we get to that point of just saying things just to say things, who we are at our core essence becomes diluted. And instead of holding our depths, we start becoming this chameleon trying to play into these different roles. And it doesn't feel like adaptability or flexibility. It feels like chameleon energy, a sense of losing one's sense of self in the quest to fulfilling everyone else's agenda. And this is no longer a place of power or empowerment. It's a place where victim mentality thrives. It's a place where the performer takes the stage, not just on stages, but in the real world setting. And that's an invitation for us to take a step back and ask ourselves one of the most important questions, which is, what are we being called at this time to do? How are we being called to serve? Your mission, why did you start it? What is your why? And when we are reminded of the why, we show up differently. It no longer becomes a question of who is watching. It's a question of God is watching. What would He say about what I'm putting out into the world? It becomes a question of there's someone out there who's watching this content and they might be in a really challenging place. If we were ever to cross paths, what would they say about my energy and the work that I've produced? Will they say it's impacted them and inspired them? Or will they look at me and walk away? It's not coming from this place of needing someone's praise. It's more so coming from this place of, what kind of legacy is your soul here to create? And when you know the legacy you're here to create, you want life more than anything else. It means that every day as you're starting to move on this planet, you're not dragging your feet forward. You're owning your power to make a positive change. You're owning your power in the authentic essence that you are, knowing that she is enough. And as you continue to remember your why, the impact that you create is felt. Even when so many words are not spoken, people can feel it in your aura and in your being. We all have these different shadows. The shadow of, when is sensuality being expressed as it's naturally moving through us versus when is it being over-exaggerated for attention, perhaps the attention we didn't receive as a little girl. We all have the shadow of speaking courageously. But when are we speaking courageously versus when are we speaking with anger hidden in our voice for a time that we didn't feel heard? We all have a shadow of expressing our love so powerfully. But where's that line between expressing our love from a place of balanced power versus expressing our love in a way that shows people, I need to prove this love to you. I need you to see every little bit of it because I'm proving the depths in my heart. And again, it becomes diluted. It no longer feels like, wow, that's a love story I'm inspired by. Instead, it feels like this person is trying to prove something. You can feel it. Once you've met the authentic part of yourself, you can feel when you yourself, as well as other people, are moving from that energy of wanting to prove themselves versus just being true to who they are and it naturally being expressed through their being. One of the ways that you can step into your power is by pausing between the different moments in your life and extending those pauses to meet more of yourself. Because what you'll find in those sacred pauses is that the world is constantly being bombarded with messages of who you need to be. So people, again, even the people who bombard you with messages and expectations of who you need to be, they're operating out of the programming that has run for so long, and they're doing the best that they can from their level of consciousness. This does not mean that you need to lower your standards to meet them. It just means bringing that awareness into your conscious state so that when you do respond, you might find yourself responding from a place of peace and compassion versus reactive states fueled by hostility. Another thing is getting comfortable with holding your power and being in your power. 2025. This will be the synopsis that I share of what unfolded before moving into the transformation and what has transpired, as well as what continues to transpire on the other side of this. So, in the bold asking and the declaration that was made, many patterns came to the surface, as well as some deep places within myself where I couldn't just ignore or avoid anymore, but I had to meet head on. And so, one of the places that I was called to meet was this feeling of not belonging. Having grown up as a woman of color, and I don't say this as a victim, I say this with the awareness that growing up, I did grow up with racism, with bullying, and noticing how different people were treated based on their skin color. And this created different beliefs where I attributed certain people with privilege versus people of color or people who are different as people who were treated sometimes inferiorly. And this created a perception with which I looked at the world for much of my young adult years and reaffirmed that narrative that I no longer wanted to carry. And so the biggest piece that I had to shift first was this idea that my belonging came from outside of me. It doesn't mean that community isn't important or that I don't need healthy relationships in my life. What it means is that in order to cultivate those healthy relationships, I first needed to create safety and that sense of belonging from within myself. And this was a process. I know there's a lot of talk on the planet around things such as nervous system regulation and breathing techniques, and all that is very beneficial. And it's not a one and done process. It takes time. And when we live in a world where there's this buzzword, quantum leap, quantum manifestation, jumping timelines, I get that piece. And I know I've also done a lot of work in the area of quantum healing, which I'm grateful for. And one of the biggest pieces that's often missed in that area is that some things, including healing and transformation, take time. And it's because when you are rebuilding something as deep as a sense of belonging, you're essentially carving out the foundation that was built with cracks, a foundation that was built on false belief systems and programming that aren't actually helping you move forward in your life. And you cannot build this new sense of self from outside in. It comes from inside out. And so that takes some time. Through this journey, there was so much that was released. And in spending a lot of time with nature, working with some of the master healers in Inca Medicine School, and also just spending a lot of time being, sitting in nature, going to the ocean, I learned that there's a lot of healing that happens in the states that we aren't forcing ourselves to move through something, when we can just lean back and be more. And if you think about it, the irony is that's often when we feel that we most belong. We're not trying to do something, we're not trying to force ourselves to get past something. Rather, we're being with ourselves. And as we are with ourselves, including those moments when you may feel lonely, when you may feel that sense of shame or guilt from being different, even though being different is quite beautiful, if you can just honor the emotions that may come up as those beliefs are being released, then you find that you are more in tune with your internal state. And once you understand that you have the power to hold any wobbles, any rising, any descent, and that you can keep coming back to your center, now you are creating a different sense of belonging. And it's a sense of belonging that is rooted in your authenticity rather than performance, rather than playing out into former narratives. And as you build a new identity, And if you're on a path of spirituality, if you want to take a step further, if you are so brave enough to let God transform your spirit and your soul into who He would have you be, this takes time. And it's because whoever you are destined to become, and it happens in every moment of shedding and becoming and remembering, it's so much greater than who you could have even envisioned yourself to be. And definitely far greater than the world would have ever taught you to be or expected you to be. What transpired on the other side of this journey was that in owning this renewed sense of belonging, any imbalanced relationships that were holding on by a thread based on the former version of me who was okay with breadcrumbs, who constantly said yes, who let other people dictate her time and energy, they came undone. And that was a painful process, let me just say that, because they were attachments. And often when you are shifting into a new identity, those attachments have to be released. As I continue to anchor into this sense of belonging from within, I held space, this liminal space of not walking back to the past I once knew, and also feeling into the uncertainty of now what? And can I be with this version of me? And in this moment in my life, as new, more empowering, loving, reciprocal relationships enter my life. And what's interesting is that many people who have entered my life now have shared that they too have an intention of receiving mutually nourishing relationships. Not one-way relationships that serve one party. And certainly not feeling guilty for saying no, especially to those people who are demanding so much, yet giving so little. In walking away and anchoring into the sense of belonging, I realize that I too deserve relationships that bring me more peace rather than chaos. I too deserve relationships that pour into me the way that I pour into people. That I too deserve relationships that mirror back my power rather than me just reflecting it to someone else. And the type of power that gets unlocked with this has nothing to do with performance. Because I wasn't trying to be someone else to now invite these beautiful relationships in, these more healthier, balanced relationships and connections. I learned that it was safe to be me, that it is safe to be me in my fullness, and that any person that I may have scared off before based on having a big energy in standing in the fullness of my power, they weren't ready for what I have to offer. And so I want to share this with any woman who also feels sometimes that she's wobbling in her power and sometimes taking 2 steps forward, but then 5 steps back because there's a part of her she's afraid to meet. And perhaps certain things she's afraid to let go in meeting more of herself. If there's any man that you scared off because of the fullness of your power, let him go. Any relationships that came undone because you started saying no to their chaos and chose your peace instead, let them go. Any rejection you have received based on being yourself, It might be easy to get entangled in the emotions and think, why weren't you chosen? Why didn't you just get the yes? Take everything that you're feeling, feel them, feel the emotions, and then channel them into deeper passion and purpose in your work, in your mission. Because guaranteed, someone is watching, someone you don't even know is listening to you and is watching you. The conversation will change when you stop trying to please people who weren't even meant to be in your world, and you start showing up in this place of power and inner alignment and peace. And instead of trying to hustle for the opportunities, you invite them in by standing in your sovereignty and in your authentic, radiant light. After having come on the other side of this transformation and noticing that this was not a loud transformation, this was not transformation that was like, look at me, and now I feel like I belong. It was transformation that happened in solitude, a lot of silence, and spending a lot of weekends by myself, except it really wasn't by myself. I feel called to share. I know God was with me and he was doing something deeper that only he could take the credit for. He was shifting my entire being in miraculous ways. And once I started to put my faith and trust in him over the algorithm and social media engagement, I found a power within. I met a power within that I didn't even know was within. And this intrinsic force, this power within, became really clear to me that it came from within, nothing external. And once I felt that in those quiet moments, in stillness, in feeling the waves of celebration and praise when no one else was watching, even though there were times where I did want someone to be there, there was something deeper that was happening on an internal level. And it was spiritual transformation. It was transformation of the spirit as well as transformation on a soul level. And once transformation begins at that level, your life changes dramatically. And so you don't even have to show up with a new haircut or something that makes it known to people that you've transformed. You can do all those things. Rather, the transformation makes people turn heads by noticing there's a lightness in your being. You're radiating with a glow, yet you're not saying much verbally. You hold your authority, yet you haven't said to anyone that you're a director or a leader or an owner. Your aura speaks before you do. And you're owning that. And once you own that, the world meets you in a different way. It's almost as though they can try to ignore you, but they can't. For anyone who has felt frustrated, tired, maybe you too have been frustrated with social media, and maybe you've questioned if you're on the right path, or maybe you're exploring this time of transition where you feel that you too are being called to something higher and greater, that your mission is being stretched, that your leadership is being stretched and expanded, and you're being called to do something way more impactful in the world. Know that when you are operating from a sense of deep inner worth, trusting in yourself, trusting in your mission, in your power, you already are changing and transforming people's lives by the very act of owning who you are. Not the different personas and roles that you thought you had to be, but by owning who you already are. In moving through this transformation, I realized that some of my former clothes, some of them ripped, And I knew I needed a new wardrobe. So I go to this boutique and I'm looking around for different yoga pants. And I'm starting to understand it's important to buy materials that are of really good quality and also eco friendly. And so I'm doing a little shopping. And I come across this woman and I'm like, I remember you. And she looks at me and she says, I remember you too. She was a housekeeper at one of the former homes I stayed at here in Costa Rica. And it was one of the first homes that I stayed at. And I remember we had some heart to hearts, and she has this beautiful, vibrant spirit. And I still remember that about her, and I share that with her. And then she helped me try on some of my clothes. And at the end, when I was paying at the register, she said, I see you sometimes online. And I said, oh, yeah? Where? And she said, Facebook. I see your videos and they're inspiring. And I just paused and took a step back because that was nearly 2 years ago that I last saw her. I paused. And when I walked out of that store, it was this huge aha moment that you just don't know who you are impacting. Even if it's someone you don't speak to anymore, even if it's someone who taught you a challenging lesson, chances are you impacted them just as much as they impacted you. To be unforgettable in a world that sometimes endorses quick hits, fast satisfaction, movement that's sometimes quick, yet based on lack rather than divine will. In a world that sometimes endorses progress just for the sake of showing the world that you're doing something at all. To go from one venture to the next just to say that you created something, even if it doesn't feel aligned, even if it doesn't feel right for your soul. To be bold and courageous, to meet the depths of your being every time you have gone into the fire, whether willingly or unwillingly. That every time you met yourself in such an intimate place, not knowing what would transpire on the other side of your transformation. For every time you are willing to say no to what might be easy, but you know is not the right way. To every time you've honored your sacred boundaries and let people react sometimes in foolish ways. In every encounter that you learned to forgive, even when someone might have wronged you so deeply. And you know you could have the potential, the option, rather, to hold it against them for the rest of your life. You have chosen to set yourself free through the pathway of acceptance and forgiveness. Things that don't exactly make it to social media, and yet you've done them over and over. The fire that doesn't necessarily get 1 million views on TikTok, but it brought resonance to your mission, to your purpose, to your being, to your belonging on this planet. The things that you don't get praised for, the things that no one sees. This is what makes you unforgettable. Having provided care for several end-of-life patients, end-of-life care for these patients, there was a common theme I saw and witnessed among many of these people, which shifted something to the core of who I am today. and continues to. They didn't necessarily talk about their jobs and their accomplishments. They wanted to know if they lived their lives fully, if they did everything that they were here to do. They questioned if they truly gave everything that they had to give to their families and their loved ones, if they traveled to all the places they wanted to travel to. Nothing about these vulnerable conversations were performative. They were authentic and vulnerable. And often people had more questions than answers. It's true, well-behaved women seldom have made history. And it's about asking yourself, if you are someone who can't stand to be living by the rules that have been made largely to restrict people, to hold women back from owning the full essence of who they are and who they are here to be. What kind of impact and legacy do you want to create? Do you want to stir up noise? Or do you want to have created impact? Do you want people to talk about you years from now, using your name as a rebellious force, simply to make noise, to stand out for an Instagram post that goes viral, or some other technology that they'll have in the future? Or do you want to have created such powerful impact led by your heart, led by your soul, that when you're spoken of one day, whether by the generations that come after you, or even complete strangers that might not even be present in your conscious awareness at this time, that they'll look back and think, I'm inspired. I'm so moved by this that I'm choosing to live differently. That your voice may activate another woman to rise and step into her full power and the truthful expression that lays deep in her heart too. That your sensual expression may unlock the desire in another woman to share and own her beauty as well. That your natural, compassionate, giving nature may be received by the right people who also understand the gift of flow and reciprocity, of giving and receiving. And that where you may have given in places and connections where it wasn't reflected back, perhaps you received beautifully in other ways, because that's what our abundant God can do. One thing that all these powerful women have had in common is that they stayed true to themselves and they chose themselves, even when the world was teaching them to choose everyone else first. And as you choose yourself and your mission that's been planted in your heart and in your soul, and as you choose wisely and consciously over and over again, in choosing yourself and feeling the sense of belonging, it's ironic because in that moment where you stop actually seeking all the praise and validation from the world is when you usually receive it. And at that point, you can remain neutral. It doesn't really do much. You don't necessarily feel so uplifted from it. You also don't feel so torn apart if you don't receive it. It's a sense of neutrality, knowing that as long as you follow the calling in your heart that God has bestowed upon you, that there's something beautiful that's happening within your own being as well as in the lives of people who are being impacted around you. Some you may never even hear from, but know that as you stand in your power, in your authenticity, you are impacting their lives, whether they share it with you or not. So the real question isn't about how can you rebel against the norms? It's about what kind of impact are you here to birth onto this planet for humanity, for all beings? What if legacies aren't something you just leave behind, but something that you are creating every day of your life? That one day, when we all have departed from this world, those legacies will still be speaking. Those legacies will still be impacting. And it's because when we align with divine will, with what God wants for us, our legacy is no longer about the years that were simply lived. It's about the movement created through our lived experience. And that movement creates a ripple that extends beyond the years that were lived. It transcends time and space in a way where people see that infinite possibilities and potential lay before them and within them the moment they decide to choose themselves and God's destiny over what the world would try to box them into. Some questions I will leave you with today are: what is a legacy that you are devoted and committed to creating on this planet? And how can you show up as that version of you today? Thank you for listening to this episode of The Voice That Sees. Please be sure to check out more episodes every other Tuesday on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. For additional content, you can follow me on Instagram at The Yoga Movement and YouTube at The Yoga Movement NYC. You can also check out my coaching programs and unique offers on my website at theyogamovementnyc.com to help support your individual and personal transformation. Until next time, be you and be well.